Alukoyan. When I was first getting into constructed languages, through Doom Eternal of all things, I found myself commonly using the sound ch in place of the glottal fricative. I found it relatively easy to make and distinct from English, so I used it a lot. This particular sound caught the attention of a nameless friend who speaks Russian, and they asked me questions about my burgeoning, now well-abandoned language. The result of these questions was a summer project that I called Nachach Kielvsnikov, or, as its directly intended translation, Nightmare Russian. At the time, my only known languages were Mandarin and English, so I conceived of Nachach as an unholy combination of the two. How does Russian fit in? I'll get to that later. Now, does this make it somewhat a posteriori? It's not for me to decide. After a year and a half of work and revision, I am very satisfied with the result. However, in favor of being cursed, I shall instead use version 1 of Nachach with its various, let's say, quirks. With that, let us commence. The basic word order in Nachach is the same as Mandarin. Subject, verb, object. Similarly to Mandarin, the first version of the language is analytical. Tense is designated at the beginning of a sentence before the subject. If no tense is stated, it is assumed to be the present tense, but can also be indicated without certainty in verbs. Ergativity is defined with a grammar particle between the possessor and the possessed, with the possessor taking an earlier place in the sentence. Due to the analytical nature of Nachach, there are no conjugations of any kind, nor any prepositions other than tense, possession, location, and plurality. Similarly to Mandarin, once again, adverbs are indicated through ergativity articles, with the described verb being the possessor. As you'll notice, there are a few complex sentences in the languages. The only ones being allowed are what I know as combinations of incomplete and complete clauses, rather than combinations of more than one complete clause. Sorry if that isn't the right term. That's all I know it by. Still relatively new, but anyways, I have not yet told you what makes the nightmare language a nightmare. First, there's a quick word about animacy in word order. For the most part, animacy is not employed in Nachach. There, however, are exceptions. Animacy is represented by moving a given animate word into the subject, or if the first word of a sentence is not a subject, moving it into that place, in front of it. The animate object is then marked as such by the quotes, ekla and skotso. However, this creates a rift in the sentence where the animate noun once was, and thus it must be filled by a particle that indicates plurality. What's really painful about this is what counts as animate. In Nachach, vegetable fruits are considered animate, and are the only class of nouns represented as such. As a matter of fact, they are the only class of nouns with definitive NVA distinction, which is something that I'll talk about soon. Anyways, vegetable fruits are considered to be tomatoes, peppers, pumpkins, peas, string beans, eggplants, avocados, olives, corn, zucchini, any and all beans, and most importantly, cucumbers. The most nightmarish thing about the nightmare language is a little feature that I like to call NVA distinction. That stands for noun, verb, adjective distinction. Again, if there's a more separate, more accurate terminology for this, I'm sorry, still relatively new to conlang. To illustrate, some languages might have a central word for the three that changes in some form to adapt the three rules. Other languages might have independent words entirely for the three functions. In English, for example, you can say that you are reading a book, say that you have a book, and say that you are bookish. Nachach is not like other languages. In Nachach, there is no NVA distinction. The word book is book. The word that means to use a book is book. And the word that makes a noun book-like is also book. For a more specific example, take the sentence, the night is black, or in Nachach, Gajachov Chestov Yeluts. There is no way to distinguish one part of a given word's function from a separate part based off of conjugation, word variation, or any other linguistic tricks I can't even remember the names of right now. And that's without mentioning that certain nouns are comprised of more than one word. There are no words that can't serve all three functions, as using traditionally verb words such as carry or to have as a noun means talking about the concept of the action itself. This is very confusing for people who aren't a native speaker or Nachach, or people that aren't me. This is, as I like to call it, the stuff of nightmares. The lack of NVA distinction leads to a few quirks, one of the most common of which is something called verb-object assimilation. Take, for instance, the sentence ol. And yes, those two letters are a full and complete sentence in Nachach. Anyways, ol is used to indicate the first person, basically I or me or tahanur. So the assimilation of both the functional verb and the object of a sentence into one word, you have ol, which means I am me. Another more fun example is in the sentence o dilstove, or I destruction. Due to the NVA distinction, the sentence can have a variety of meanings, such as I am destruction, I destroy, I am a destroyer, I have the qualities of destruction, and I have the qualities of a destroyer. Fun fact about the word dilstove, it's a misremembering of the GoldenEye 007 pistol, DD-44 Dostove. Remember that book example from earlier? Ol katrejech can mean either I read a book or I am a book. Notice that at no point did I ever use anything even resembling Russian grammar or anything based to be different from Russian grammar. I didn't even research Russian grammar when doing this. That should cover all of the necessary grammar. Now it's time for phonology and writing. There's a reason that I included the grammar before phonology. It's because the phonology and writing were made at the same time. See, what I did was I went onto the Wikipedia page for the Russian alphabet, wrote down all of the letters and their English equivalents, and used that to make both the writing and phonology. Except I lied. To make things even more nightmarish for native speakers of Russian, I included 5 extra letters. Edvam, Oshvi, Urs, Eyes, and Staff. Yes, that is a Nordic O with a line through it that you've been seeing this whole time. And I made names for all of the pre-existing letters to further confuse them. Things were written strangely also. The first letter of a word is capitalized and the remaining vowels are half the capital letter's size, and the consonants are halfway in between the two. This actually looks really cool in writing, but when trying to replicate the effect online, things start to look a little janky, without painstaking work. Naturally, the transcription of the sample text will be done in the online fashion. As I previously said, all letters have their own sounds, and all letters have their own in-language names. I shall thusly show each letter and speak its associated sound. Along with each letter, I shall show its in-language name and the sound of its name in the original Latin transcription. It is very important for you to look at the Latin transcription. It will make you feel pain. Here goes. A, B, V, G, D, Y, Ya, J, Z, I, K, L, M, N, O, P, R, S, T, U, F, H, C, Ch, Sh, Sh. No sound. E. Also no sound. E. U. Ya. A. St. O. I. And now here's a consonant table. And here's a vowel table. All of those letters took around 4 hours to get right. Now, I'm sure that you noticed that the letter that usually makes the J sound is pronounced as J, with a soft H, unless the letter is at the front of a sentence, in which the soft H is realized as a hard H, unless the following consonant is Y, but it's getting into semantics. This is definitely not a mistake. This letter is also changed. In normal Russian, the letter would make a consonant, quote, soft. In Nachach, it gives the letter a second sound. Take a look at yet, for example, being pronounced as you would as such in normal context. If you add the soft consonants to the end of it, you have what looks like an E flat, and you'd expect it to be realized as yay. It is not. It is instead realized as ja. The same principle applies for E letters, in which applying the flat causes it to be realized as a J instead of E. Conversely, this letter is like a musical natural sign that reverses the effect of the soft consonant on a letter, as the effect that the consonant has would remain constant if it weren't corrected. There is some phonological evolution, as I intended it to make a more naturalistic language in the latter days of creation. One example, aside from the j rules, is vowel degradation, specifically with a and o in front of voiced fricatives. One common example is with the consonant v. In front of this, both a and o degrade into the schwa. This degradation only applies if it's not in the first or last vowel to occur in the given word, but also semantics. This is probably the most common example of evolution, and is therefore the most relevant and indicative of its evolving peers. Anyway, now with that out of the way, time for the passage. Owigs omgnivi fiag school aikstevelch afierkos kum jechesk. Usnach hol ikros pevil aigja afuti op jechev, usnach kiem pusjechi omgnivi. Schels afierkos pusjechi omgnivi. Afierkos kiem kaltresa oxo hol poschas malkiesh. All things considered, I think that I did a relatively good job at making a first complete language. To be honest, I totally and completely failed at making a language that is a nightmare for Russian speakers specifically, as the only thing that even closely related to Russian that I did for this project was in my first day working on it, and that was just writing down some Cyrillic characters. I don't even think I got the entire alphabet. However, I feel I succeeded in making a language that is a nightmare for everyone to learn. If someone seeing this knows Russian, I'd be delighted to know how much of a nightmare this is. I, still being proud of my creation and wanting to implement it into my con world, have since reworked the language to make it more usable, but still keep its defining features. I think that every language I make has something at least a little cursed. Like one language, Heja Sefsevan has no stop consonants, hence the name Smooth Tongue. I may or may not put out a video with Nachach in its refined form and its history within the con world, but hey, I think you might find this to be pretty cursed. And again, I won't find out until the circus of comes to town. Hetki raukkaa ään.